This video explains what Ormus, ORME, monoatomic gold, white powdered gold, Starfire, Manna, Shewbread, food of the gods, nectar of the gods, what this really is. The gatekeepers, such as this man, Dan Winter, would have you believe that it is a very complicated substance, this monoatomic gold that is derived from mummy salt and can be synthetically created through deep seawater bacterial extracts. He has his own YouTube channel and helped create Gaia TV and is instrumental in trying to suppress this information about Starfire, about Manna. I learned pretty early on while practicing medicine in my career that it takes a very wise and skilled person to be able to take a complex situation or concept and explain it in layman's terms or terms that are easy to understand. It is a person that wants to withhold information or keep you stupid that uses complicated terms, talks in circles, and uses tangential reasoning to make the idea unapproachable to the average person. I'm going to let Dan here explain what he thinks monoatomic gold is, and then the rest of my video will proceed about what it really is, the Starfire.
So, the issue we want to deal with tonight is that there's a common thread between some of the most important spiritual mysteries in history, which are, for example, remember we've talked many times that mummy powder was served in every pharmacy in Europe for hundreds of years, and we later learned it was because of the gold powder Ormus amulet in the ground up mummy powder, and we thought, well, gee, were the Egyptians eating all that gold powder? No, it was because the natron salt in the mummification process had literally an alchemizing transmutation effect on the living tissue of the body when it was super dried in the right electrical condition. So the magic of the mummy powder is actually how did the natron salt actually enable the transmutation of the human living tissue into an Ormus amulet, not unlike the way in which we are now actually commercializing agricultural Ormes from deep seawater into a gold powder amulet, which is tremendously fabulous for agriculture. And you'll see more of that soon in our theimploder.com with our wonderful partner Jason Matozo of fractalwater.com, where originally we used that same agricultural Ormes along with effective microorganism and theimploder.com, the vortex imploder, when we proved in desert conditions in Dubai, thanks to Roger Green, in the Bloom the Desert project, fractalfield.com/bloomthedesert and bloomthedesert.com, we proved, thanks to Roger's sweat in the desert, that we dramatically reduced salt in desert farming using agricultural Ormes, which is basically a gold powder amulet derived from deep seawater, which we've now discovered new ways to commercialize, and the effective microorganism, originally from Japan and other sources where you take the best of the microorganism that would seed a compost pile, and the imploder. And with that ground agricultural treatment, we brought implosion to agriculture.
In the Christian tradition, it is customary to take the communion sacrament, the Mass, wherein wine is drunk from the sacred chalice, symbolically representing the blood of Jesus, the lifeblood of the Messianic vine. Could it be perhaps that the modern Christian custom is an unwitting throwback to some distant pre-Noah ritual which Jehovah opposed? If so, then it is known that the chalice is a holy female symbol which has been emblematic of the womb from the earliest times. Might this even have been an extract of menstrual blood? The answer to these questions is yes. That was precisely the custom, but it was not so unsavory as it might seem. Indeed, few of us think to inquire about the ultimate sources of many of today's ingested medicines and bodily supplements, and those in the know would often be reluctant to tell us. The Premarin hormone, for example, comes from the urine of pregnant mares, while certain growth hormones and insulin are manufactured from E. coli, a fecal bacterium. The blood extract in question, in the first instance, not human, but from the sacred Anunnaki lunar essence, that of Enki's sister, Nin-Kursag, the designated Lady of Life. It was defined as the most potent of all life forces and was venerated as being Starfire. It was from the womb of Nin-Kursag that the kingly line was born, and it was with her blood, the divine Starfire, that the dragon's succession was supplementally fed. In ancient Egypt, Nin-Kursag was called Isis, and by either name she was the ultimate mother of the Messianic line, for hers was the matriarchal gene which constituted the beginning, the gene Isis, or as the Greeks identified it, the Genesis. It is worth reminding ourselves then that the biblical edict to abstain from blood came not from Enki the wise, but from Enlil Jehovah, the god of wrath, who had instigated the flood, had wrought havoc in Ur and Babylon, and had endeavored to deceive Adam by saying he would die if he ate from the tree of knowledge. This was not a God who liked people, and the Sumerian records are very clear in this regard. Hence, he forbade the taking of blood. This was not likely to have been an edict for the benefit of Noah and his descendants. It was most probably to their detriment. In strict terms, the original Starfire was the lunar essence of the goddess, but even in an everyday mundane environment, menstruum contains the most valuable endocrinal secretions, especially those of the pineal and pituitary glands. The brain's pineal gland in particular was directly associated with the tree of life, for this tiny gland was said to secrete the very essence of active longevity, called soma, or as the Greeks called it, ambrosia. In mystic circles, the menstrual flower, she who flows, has long been designated flower and is represented as a lily or a lotus. Indeed, the definition of flower is the very root of our modern flower. In ancient Sumer, the key females of the dragon succession were all venerated as lilies, having such names as Lily, Lulua, Lilith, Lilutu, and Lilet. In pictorial representation, the Messianic dragon bore little relation to the winged fire-breathing beast of later Western mythology. It was, in essence, a large-jawed serpent with 4 legs, very much like a crocodile or a monitor. This was the sacred Mesa, whose name was Draco. Draco was a divine emblem of the Egyptian pharaohs, a symbol of Egyptian therapeutae of the Essenes at Qumran, and was the Bistea Neptunus, the sea serpent of the descendant Merovingian fisher kings of Europe. In the old Hebrew Bibles, all references to serpents are made by use of the word nahash from the stem nish. But this usage does not relate to serpents in the way that we would know them, that is, as venomous snakes. It relates to serpents in their traditional capacity as bringers of wisdom and enlightenment, for the word nahash actually means to decipher or to find out. Serpents, in one form or another, were always associated with wisdom and healing, and the trees of life and knowledge are customarily identified with serpents. Indeed, the insignia of many today's medical associations is precisely this image of a serpent coiled around the plant of birth, tree of life, a depiction shown in the clay reliefs of ancient Sumer to be Enki's personal emblem. Interestingly, though, another common emblem for medical relief organization depicts 2 coiled serpents spiraling around the winged caduceus of Hermes the magician. In these instances, the true symbolism of the starfire ritual is conveyed, and this symbol can be traced back to the very origins of the alchemical mystery schools and Gnostic institutions. The records explain that this central staff and entwined serpents represent the spinal cord and the sensory nervous system. The 2 uppermost wings signify the brain's lateral ventricle structures. Between these wings, above the spinal column, is shown the small central node of the pineal gland. The combination of central pineal and its lateral wings has long been referred to as the swan, and in the Grail lore, as in some yogic circles, the swan is emblematic of the fully enlightened being. This is the ultimate realm of consciousness achieved by the medieval knights of the Swan, as epitomized by such chivalric figures as Percival and Lohengrin. Most of you are probably quite familiar with the functions of the pineal and other glands of the endocrinal system. In the days of ancient Sumer, the priests of Anu, the father of Enlil and Enki, perfected and elaborated the ramifying medical science of living substances, with menstrual starfire being an essential source component. In the first instance, this was pure Anunnaki lunar essence called gold of the gods, and it was fed only to the kings and queens of the dragon succession. Later, however, in Egypt and Mediterranean, menstrual starfire was ritually collected from sacred virgin priestesses who were venerated as scarlet women. Indeed, the very word ritual stems from this practice, and from the word ritu, which defined the sacred ceremony of the red gold. Endocrinal supplements are, of course, still used by today's organotherapy establishment, but their inherent secretions, such as melatonin and serotonin, are obtained from the desiccated glands of dead animals, and they lack the truly important elements which exist only in live human glandular manufacture. In the fire symbolism of ancient alchemy, the color red is synonymous with the metal gold. In some traditions, including the Indian Tantras, red is also identifiable with black. Hence, the goddess Kali is said to be both red and black. The original heritage of Kali was, however, Sumerian, and she was said to be Kalamoth, the sister of Cain's wife, Lulua. Kali was a primary princess of the dragon house, and from her Starfire association, she became the goddess of time, seasons, periods, and cycles. Because of this, her name was the root of the word calendar, which was concerned with the divisions of seasonal time. In the early days, therefore, the metals of the alchemists were not common metals, but living essences, and the ancient mysteries were of a physical, not metaphysical nature. Indeed, the very word secret has its origin in the hidden knowledge of glandular secretions. Truth was the ritu, the redness or blackness, and from the word ritu stems not only ritual, but also the words right, root, and red. The ritu, it was said, reveals itself as physical matter in the form of the purest and most noble of all metals, gold. Hence, gold was deemed as ultimate truth. Since Kali was associated with black, being black but beautiful, the English word coal, denoting that which is black, stems also from her name via the intermediate word coal. In the Hebrew tradition, Bath Kol, a Kali counterpart, was called the daughter of the voice, and the voice was said to originate during a female's puberty. Hence, the womb was associated with the voice, and starfire was said to be the auricular word of the womb. The womb was therefore itself the utterer, or the uterus. The Scarlet Women were so called because of their being a direct source of the priestly starfire. They were known in Greek as the Herodulae, sacred women, a word later transformed via medieval French into English to harlot. In the early Germanic tongue, they were known as whores, which was later anglicized to whores. However, the word originally meant quite simply beloved ones. As pointed out in good etymological dictionaries, these words were descriptions of high veneration and were never interchangeable with such words as prostitute or adulteress. Their now common association was, in fact, a wholly contrived strategy of the medieval Roman Church in its bid to denigrate the noble status of the sacred priestess. The withdrawal of knowledge of the genuine starfire tradition from the public domain occurred when the science of the early adepts and later Gnostics, the true pre-Christian Christians, was stifled by the forgers of historic Christianity. A certain amount of the original gnosis or knowledge is preserved in the Talmudic and rabbinical lore, but generally speaking, the mainstream Jews and Christians did all in their power to distort and destroy all traces of the ancient art. In addition to being the gold of the gods, the Anunnaki menstruum was also called the vehicle of light, being the ultimate source of manifestation, and in this regard, it was directly equated with the mystical waters of creation, the flow of eternal wisdom. It was for this reason that the Rosicrucius, the dew cup, or the cup of waters identified as a red cross within a circle, became the mark of Cain and the subsequent emblem of the kingly succession. It was said that the light remained quite dormant in a spiritually unawakened person, but that it could be awakened and motivated by the spiritual energy of self-will and by constant self-inquiry. This is not an obvious mental process, but a truly thought-free consciousness, a formless plane of pure being. The Sumerian records relate that Cain's son, King Etana, partook of the plant of birth in order to father his own son and heir, King Bali. And the plan of birth was directly associated with individual longevity and the office of cainship or kingship. It was itself related to starfire and to pineal gland activity, and partaking of the plant of birth was the ritual of ingesting the starfire, the pure Anunnaki female essence, the nectar of supreme excellence. In this regard, the Anunnaki flower or lily was held
to be the cup-bearer, the transmitter of the rich food of the matrix. In this capacity, she was called the Rose of Sharon, from the word Shah, meaning orbit, along with the words Ra and On, relating to the ultimate temple of light. The significance of this highly venerated station is actually made apparent in the Bible's esoteric Song of Solomon, wherein the Messianic bride proclaims to the king, "I am the Rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys." A Starfire recipient king was considered to have become qualified for kingship when he reached a predestined state of enlightened consciousness, a state when his aptitudes for wisdom and leadership had been enhanced to a realm of kingship, called the Malku. It was from this Mesopotamian word Malku that the Hebrews derived their words Malchus, king, and Malkut, kingdom. Only in very recent times have medical scientists identified the hormonal secretion of the pineal gland, finally isolating it in 1968. The essence was called melatonin, which means night worker, from the Greek melos, meaning black, and tosos, meaning labor. Those with a high melatonin output react strongly against sunlight because it affects their mental capability. They are essentially night operatives. Melatonin is called the hormone of darkness, as it is produced only at night or in the dark. Exposure to an excess of sunlight actually makes the pineal gland smaller and lessens spiritual awareness, whereas darkness and high pineal activity enhance the keen intuitive knowledge of the subtle mind while reducing the stress factor. At this stage, it is of interest to note how it was that the Christian Church eventually demolished the true significance of Starfire ritual by maneuvering it into the realm of sinister Gothic legend. In the old tradition, the ultimate holders of the Malkut were known as dragons or pendragons, and the reigning head was also known as Draco. By virtue of their bodily conditioning through supplementary melatonin and other hormonal secretions, they were in fact princes of darkness, and they gained their heightened awareness and above-normal powers and longevity from the Starfire, the lunar blood of the Anunnaki queens and the priestly Scarlet women. As detailed in the bloodline of the Holy Grail, the brutal Catholic inquisitions of the Middle Ages were set against all so-called heretics who, in one way or another, supported the Messianic blood royal, the sangreal of the Dragon Kings, against the corrupted dogma of the bishops. Many of the victims were classified as occultists and witches, and they were charged with upholding the ancient and heretical cult of Draco, the Prince of Darkness. They were proclaimed by the church authorities to be vampires. I previously mentioned the significance of the ancient Egyptian court of the dragon, pointing out that after some 4,000 years of this sovereign order is still operative today. Back in the 15th century, a prominent chancellor of the court was Prince Vlad III of Transylvania, Wallachia, who built the citadel of Bucharest. The establishment's real fear of Dracula, however, was not in his savage treatment of enemies, such things were commonplace in their day, but his in-depth knowledge of alchemy and the ancient Starfire customs. Having attended the Austrian School of Solomon in Hermannstadt, he had an in-depth scientific understanding of the bodily effects of melatonin and serotonin, which enhance longevity and increase consciousness. And so the Canaanite kings of Mesopotamia, the first pendragons of the Messianic bloodline, while already being of high Anunnaki substance, were fed with further Anunnaki starfire to increase their perception, awareness, and intuition so that they became masters of knowingness, almost like gods themselves. At the same time, their stamina levels and immune systems were dramatically strengthened so that the anti-aging properties of the regularly ingested Anunnaki melatonin and serotonin facilitated extraordinary lifespans. All records of the era confirm that this was the case, with those of the kingly line living for hundreds of years, and in this regard there was no reason to be over-skeptical about the great ages of the early patriarchs as given in the book of Genesis. In addition to the Starfire ritual, the bloodline kings were also said to have been nourished with the milk of the goddess, and it would appear that this milk contained an enzyme that itself conducive to the act of longevity. Today's genetic researchers call this enzyme telomerase. As recently reported in the Journal of Science, corporate studies and those of the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center have determined that telomerase has unique anti-aging properties. Healthy body cells are programmed to divide many times during a lifetime, but this process of division and replication is finite, so that a non-dividing state is ultimately achieved. This is a crucial factor of aging. The divisional potential is controlled by caps at the end of the DNA strands, rather like plastic tips on shoelaces. These caps are called telomeres. As each cell divides, a piece of telomere is lost, and the dividing process ceases when the telomeres have shortened to an optimal and critical length. There is then no new cell replication, and all that follows is deterioration. Laboratory experiments with tissue samples have now shown that application of the genetic enzyme telomerase can prevent telomere shortening upon cell division and replication. Hence, body cells can continue to divide way beyond their naturally restricted programming, just as do cancer cells, which achieve immortality through being rich in telomerase. The book of Leviticus also refers to the shewbread. And thou shalt take fine flour and bake 12 cakes thereof, and thou shalt put pure frankincense upon each row. The use of the word flour in English translations is accurately incorrect. The word powder would be more accurate. The records of mystery schools cite rather more precisely that the shewbread was made with the white powder of gold. And this is particularly significant because in Exodus it is stated that Moses took the golden calf which the Israelites had made and burnt it in the fire and ground it to a white powder. In this instance, the correct word powder is used, but firing gold does not, of course, produce powder. It simply produces molten gold. So what is this magical white powder? Is there any way of using heat to transform metallic gold into a white powder which is ingestible and beneficial? Indeed there is, and it is here that the foremost alchemical principle of the master craftsman was applied. To make gold, you must take gold. Gold is the most noble of metals, and gold was always representative of truth. Through the regular use of Anunnaki starfire, the gold of the gods, the recipients were moved into realms of heightened awareness and consciousness because of its inherent melatonin and serotonin. This was the realm of advanced enlightenment, the plane of Sharon, and the starfire gold was deemed to be the ultimate route to the light. Hence, the heavy, mundane person, lead, could be elevated to the heightened state of awareness, perceived as gold. This was the root of the alchemical lore thereafter. The shewbread, or as the Egyptians called it, shefa food, was traditional entitlement of the Israelite and Egyptian messiahs, for the early pharaohs were themselves fully consecrated priest-kings of the Grail bloodline, having descended through Nimrod in the Canaanite succession.